House Bill 1405, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to ask
Give us just a minute.
Brown to come to the table. I'd like to recognize Representative Brown to help me present the bill.
All right, you're recognized to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Carolyn Brown, District 41. House Bill 1405 is an act to create Quincy's Law and to provide for consideration of a differential diagnosis in an investigation involving abuse under the Child Maltreatment Act. And I want to thank DCFS and the Arkansas Children's Hospital for providing this amended language for House Bill 1405. And I honestly do not know. I've never presented in a Senate committee if I have to, if we pass this as amended or as is. This bill is needed to address a growing concern amongst our constituents that children who may have underlying genetic and therefore heritable connective tissue disorders are being diagnosed as abused when indeed they have a rare connective tissue disorder that needs to be identified to allow them to receive appropriate medical care. I'm sure you all would like to know why I've titled this bill Quincy's Law. Quincy's parents brought their concerns to me over a year ago. He had been diagnosed by a local physician as abused. Other doctors who examined Quincy and/or his medical records determined that he had been born with rickets and possibly one of the other conditions listed in this legislation. Long story short, Quincy, at the age of 3 months, was discovered to have 18 broken bones in various stages of healing and a hematoma, which he was born with. Children with connective tissue disorders can suffer broken bones before birth, during labor and delivery, and then with just regular handling. In fact, both Quincy and his mother were discovered to have extremely low vitamin D levels. Vitamin D is critical to the development of strong bones. In his parents' ongoing struggle to search to find out what's wrong with Quincy, they recently learned that Quincy does have Stickler's syndrome, a connective tissue disorder, which the physician told them is a close cousin to Ehlers-Danlos. Quincy's mother was diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos earlier this year, and his father exhibits strong characteristics of a different connective tissue disorder known as Marfan's syndrome and is undergoing testing to make that determination. All of what I'm learning about the failure to diagnose connective tissue disorders until adulthood, or maybe never, is consistent with Quincy's parents either recently being diagnosed or just now exploring a likely possibility of a connective tissue disorder. Quincy and his mother's recent diagnoses cast doubt in my mind on whether Quincy was actually abused. However, we will not be able to resolve that in the legislation. But by passing this bill, we can hopefully protect other families from the type of financial, social, and emotional devastation Quincy's family has experienced. Additionally, the proper diagnosis of a connective tissue disorder means that children who have them will receive the care they need and receive it more quickly. This bill passed out of House Judiciary Committee and off the House floor with no dissenting votes. With that, I'm closed and will appreciate a good vote.
All right. All right, Senator Garner.
Thank you. So the additional examination is purely to determine if there's an underlying medical condition. It's not to make a determination about if or there was abuse. Is that correct?
Well, the second opinion, and I really don't know how we're going to handle that. We're going to be working with DCFS following the passage of this legislation to see how we're actually going to implement this. But I would believe if another doctor familiar with these types of disorders examined the victim, the child, and determined that a connective tissue disorder existed, then that would have to be taken into consideration.
Yes, ma'am. It looks like it specifically says it's not victim of sexual abuse, but my question is, so the second opinion can be done, say it's done 2 or 3 weeks later. It's going to be hard to determine if the abuse was legitimate weeks later. if there isn't like some substantial scar tissue or any other medical condition. My question is, the determination will be by that medical say, hey, if they have this underlying condition, that can be evidence that they actually were not abused. But will that person be determining whether they were abused or not? There's a distinction between those two. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Not exactly, but I'm going to try. What happens, like a child with, or an adult with a connective tissue disorder, say the Ehlers-Danlos, has very hypermobile joints, and a baby with this condition, I forget the technical term, might just lay there just kind of just not like a typical baby.
Yes, ma'am.
There's the way, from everything I've read, the way these conditions are generally diagnosed is by physical appearance.
Yes, ma'am.
Physical manifestations. And so then once you see these physical manifestations, you dig deeper.
Okay.
But you can do genetic testing, but the genetic testing is not the diagnostic tool that you want to rely on, because a lot of these conditions have not fully been identified.
Yes, ma'am. I understand. I just want to make sure.
They're
Thank you.
rare.
Thank you, ma'am.
Senator Garner, would you like Misha Martin to come up and elaborate?
Explain that better. Yes, sir.
Misha, if you would like to come to the other table
I just
and identify yourself for the record.
Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm Misha Martin. I'm the Director of the Division of Children and Family Services. So, Senator Garner, if I understand your question correctly, you're asking whether the second opinion would determine whether there's child abuse. So, to answer your question, the second opinion, they would be determining whether there's an underlying condition, and they would be recommending, like saying, yes, I believe this is child abuse, no, I'm not. But then that would be taken into a holistic approach of DCFS or crimes against children, talking with the first opinion, the second opinion, and then us making the determination of whether we believe the evidence supports child abuse. But we would definitely take that second opinion into account in making the determination or the finding as to child abuse. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It's 2 points. One, if this say I get the second opinion, there's no timeline on this. So if I got it 3 months later, it'd be hard for a doctor to determine whether it's abuse unless it's a long-term injury or something that you could look at. Say if, second part is, I don't think this would happen a lot, but say it's like expert witnesses. Sometimes you can get them to sway one way or another. And I would hate for certain doctors to make opinions that necessarily, that you could buy an opinion. I don't think that'd be rare, but I think it's possible. But you're saying that it would just take that, if they diagnose that condition, that would go into the overall finding, just kind of act as a check and balance to that initial one.
That's right. And then ultimately, depending on whether the child enters foster care or whether there's a finding and there's a court proceeding at the Office of Appeals and Hearing, then that judge would have to weigh the evidence of what the primary opinion was, the secondary would take that weight, take the credibility of the doctors, their credentials, what they saw, timelines if that's necessary, and then make a finding of child abuse or not.
Okay, thank you. That's what I needed. Thank you.
May I speak to that?
Yes, Representative Brown.
For instance, with the Ehlers-Danlos, a child, like I'm sure there'll be pictures taken or notes in the medical records of the original doctor, examining doctor, diagnosing doctor. However, you could have broken bones, but no visible bruising. So those, if it's Ehlers-Danlos, the bones can be broken with simple handling and no physical trauma.
All right, any other questions from committee? Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak for or against the bill? We have a Sarah Culp to speak for the bill. Yes. All right, if you will recognize yourself for the record.
Hello, I am Sarah Culp.
Ms. Culp, if you don't mind to remove, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Okay.
I don't know if, thank you.
Okay. My name is Sarah Culp.
But you're recognized.
Okay. I am the mother of Quincy, who this bill would be named after. When Quincy was 95 days old, that's when we were accused. Quincy had been to the doctor somewhere between or other medical professionals somewhere between 2 and 3 dozen times. I have a lot of faith in our medical professionals, particularly since this pandemic, and I don't believe that they missed what would have been signs of abuse. As Representative Brown said, that some of these present with broken bones that have no visible trauma, no bruising around them, no obvious signs. There was a fracture mentioned by one of my son's surgeons a couple of days after we were accused that was on his right elbow, and it was dated to be 3.5 to 4 months old, which was older than Quincy was at the time. This leads me to believe that most likely Quincy's injuries, at least some of them, were before he was born, and others from things like changing his diaper or picking him up. One thing I've noticed about the records is that when they did any history on our families at all, I was supposed to answer whether I had had any surgeries. And I had had a wisdom tooth extraction, which is normal, I believe, for most people. And I had had a laser surgery to repair my retinas, which is a much rarer surgery. The doctor who initially diagnosed my son as abused did not note this surgery, even though I am quite sure I told her about it. And I think that if the doctor who evaluated the records and gave the initial opinion had had all of the evidence in front of her, I believe that the final diagnosis would have been much different. The geneticist at Children's, when he heard about my surgery on my eyes, he said that it was likely that he had a connective tissue disorder, judging by this single surgery that I had had as about 10 years before this. Now, Quincy has received a diagnosis, at least clinically. We are going to follow up with genetic testing for that, of Stickler syndrome. Again, this was because of my surgery and a known family history of retinal detachments and retinal problems. Our experience has already helped other families here in Arkansas. I recently found out that one of my cousins was accused after his granddaughter, adopted, so it's not a genetic thing running in my family, died of SIDS. Because of our case, he knew what to look for. And I'm hoping that our experiences, while what happened to my family can't be corrected fully, will help other families here in Arkansas. I would appreciate a good vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Culp, for your testimony. Seeing no one else in the audience that wishes to speak for, against, Senator Clark, are you closed?
I am closed. Would appreciate a good vote and make a motion to pass.
All right, we have a motion to pass by Senator Clark and a second by Senator Ballinger. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Congratulations, Senator Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee.